everyone, this is Mike Cicchini with denofgeek.com, and we're here in San Diego at San Diego Comic-Con with James Tynion IV, writer of Justice League. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing really well.
Thanks for coming.
I'm very happy to be here. I realized earlier today, actually, that this is actually my 10th consecutive San Diego Comic-Con. So I realized that because the badges have Walking Dead Season 10 on them, and I remember coming the first time, and it was when Walking Dead was like plastered all over for the first season. So it's exciting to be here and be a part of the San Diego family. And yeah, thanks for talking to me.
Well, and now 10 years later, you're writing the book that is literally the spine of the DC universe right now with Justice League.
It's pretty scary. Scott Snyder and I have been planning this big story, and now it's really coming to fruition, and everyone is seeing exactly what we sort of kicked into, like the boulder we started rolling down the hill at the end of Metal, and everything we've been doing across the line, and it's all coming to a head with the Year of the Villain and all the lead up to Justice Doom War in Justice League, and it's really exciting.
But obviously, Year of the Villain is ongoing, and Justice Doom War we just took a major step towards in the latest issue. But the kind of elephant in the room here is all of the elements of various DC crises that have been seeded in this book over the last year and change. So how do you deal with something that big and still manage to tell all of these other stories that you have to tell?
I mean, it's intimidating. It is honestly very intimidating, because what we wanted to do more than anything is do something very respectful to the entire history of crises within the DC universe. We have, there are nods towards, obviously, the original Crisis on Infinite Earths. There are nods towards Infinite Crisis, but also Final Crisis. There may be nods to even more things that may have had Crisis in the label as we move forward. It's all about showing that the connections in and around the DC universe, and that this is the culmination of one of the biggest. We want this to feel like so epic in scale, and so interconnected to all of those pieces, but feeling naturally as a part of them. That was something, as we were building this big new villain, Perpetua, who I think is going to be this one of the scariest villains in the history of the DC universe. And as she rises, we see her connections to the Monitors and both the Monitor and the Anti-Monitor, and with the new character that was hinted at back in Metal, the World Forger, and then Scott and Jorge Jimenez really introduced in the Sixth Dimension arc that just wrapped up in Justice League. And it's like, we're playing with all the craziest pieces, but I hope it feels like it's all part of one tapestry, because I think sometimes people get afraid that some of the crazier elements and the more cosmic elements of the DC universe, that they somehow are out of sync with some of the more grounded elements. But we wanted a story that touched on both and was driven by real deep human emotion, and that's how we got where we are right now.
Well, the thing that always kind of strikes me whenever somebody brings up the word crisis is the perception with fans is that these are always intended to fix things, that they're intended to fix things that are broken in the DC universe or within DC continuity. That doesn't really seem to be the case this time. So, what, is there kind of a mandate that you guys have set out for yourselves as far as the way you're building this story?
That's a great question. It's definitely it isn't about fixing things. It feels more to us about celebrating things, and it's celebrating things by using all of these crisis elements to build to a crisis level situation that our heroes need to try to overcome. It's all. I'm trying to figure out how to answer this question without spoiling some of the huge things that I can't even begin to hint about, because all these stories are, they're all part of one big map and one big plan, and that's the biggest thing that I want to in right now, is that everything you're seeing that our little corner of the DC universe do with, in all 3 Justice League titles, in the Batman Who Laughs miniseries that is just wrapping up, and then the Batman Superman series that's about to launch with Josh Williamson and David Marquez. Like, we have this big machine moving, and it is going to drive a lot of story, and all of these pieces are connected, and they all matter, and they are going to culminate in one of the biggest stories you guys have seen. So there's a reason we're playing with all of these elements that I can't hint at, and I may have already said too much.
So this is not a small story, but you seem to have you seem to be able to play with whatever you want in the DC universe. So how do you and Scott decide, which of these elements you're going to pull from as you start to craft everything? Because it seems like nothing's off limits. No idea is too big or too weird or too cosmic. So is there anything that you've kind of had to leave on the table where you said, oh, well, maybe we should do this, and then you said, well, no, it doesn't really fit? Or maybe you say, I can't imagine how any villain would be bigger or crazier than Perpetua, for example. But, has there ever been a time when you felt that you might have to scale things back a little bit in order to move the story forward?
I think there are moments where we're just like, okay, how can we make sure that we're landing making sure all of the character beats are hitting, making sure it doesn't get too dialed up, too crazy, too fast. But honestly, part of the joy of this is the open toy box. It is the fact that, for so long, both Scott Snyder and I were operating in Gotham City, and between all of the Batman books and Batman Eternal and Detective Comics that we were working on for years, we had one of the biggest, best toy boxes in comics. And then after Metal and the launch of Justice League, we were given the DC universe, and we have dumped the DC universe out on the table and taken all of our favorite pieces and kind of showed the DC universe as we see it, and try to capture the pure energy and joy that we see at the heart of the universe, and then try to create a threat that, when the Justice League is so powerful and so capable of doing so many things, you have to up the scale of the threat, and that was the birth of Year of the Villain. That was us talking about Lex Luthor's plan and the expansion of the Legion of Doom, and what his sacrifice at the start of Year of the Villain and what that builds to. And honestly, that's how we got to where we're going. It all built very naturally, and as we're building, we sort of see connections between, in this moment we can bring in these sorts of characters because we're playing with all of the fundamental forces of the DC universe. And as you see, in some of the covers coming up for Justice Doom War, one of the big things we're tapping into in that arc is hyper time, and that's how you see Kamandi on one cover and the Justice Society of America on another cover, and it's that might be a hint of where we're going with this big final battle. So yeah, no, we've got a lot of big stuff coming.
Well, I just recently went back and reread almost, from the very beginning of this run. And the seeds of what has recently happened with Lex Luthor was there from the first page almost. So how far ahead did you guys plan when you first sat down to start breaking this book? Obviously, saying, we planned a year out isn't that big a deal in comics these days, but we're now talking about stuff that's happening 6 months down the road and beyond, especially as we talk about the biggest story of them all. So how deep into this were you guys when you first started planning the book?
The map started when we were planning Metal. When we were planning Metal and all of the tie-ins to Metal, because the tie-ins for Metal were almost where some of the bigger seeds were planted. It was the Justice League tie-in to Metal that started to set up the plot for Cyborg that led into Justice League Odyssey, and and it was No Justice that's created the plot that set up Justice League Dark, and so we had all of these pieces, everything that were sort of building out of it. Like I can't say that it's like we knew what issue specific things were happening in, and some moments we decided to dial up, and some moments we decided to dial back. But these, like all of the core pieces, I remember I was still living in Los Angeles at the time, and Scott came out for a big meeting, and we were going over the whiteboard in my house, and like we laid out sort of the core arcs of the story, and it was all about these hidden forces and how we, that's when we started talking about like the still force, the ultraviolet spectrum, the graveyard of gods, the tier of extinction, and then down to the fact that we knew that we were going to bring in Mr. Mix's Spitalik. I'm not pronouncing. I think I got that actually. And Batmite in the Sixth Dimension storyline, and that we were going to bring the World Forger in and the Monitors in, and that all of these things were going to be connected and build towards this big final moment. And then the exciting thing was it was in conversation with DC that we decided, okay, we can level all of this up by really making the Year of the Villain hit across the line, not just in Justice League. And honestly, I think that's really helped fuel what we're building, and it's really exciting.
Well, now that Year of the Villain is in full swing, it feels like that also kind of sprung from those, every fifth issue, was it, or fourth issue was Legion of Doom focused?
Yeah.
And those were always your babies.
Oh, yeah.
But now that we're into this, now that Lex is, that Lex is what he is right now, and it's like, I can't even try to explain it. But this feels like it's kind of like you've taken the driver's seat a little bit more now, and it feels like do you feel that Year of the Villain has kind of was seeded specifically by those issues of yours early on?
Well, it's all been part of one big plan, and it's always been something where that was sort of the idea from the beginning. Scott is the core focus was the Justice League, and my core focus was the Legion of Doom, and particularly building Lex up for this big moment where he is now, and so now as we build into Justice Doom War is co-written by Scott and myself. Our hands are in every single issue. We've been really, really working closely together on the whole thing. So it's sort of like if the Justice League has been building on one track and the Legion of Doom has been building on another track, this is the big epic arc where we collide. And Scott, but it's like Scott and I work so closely together that it's gonna read like a perfect continuation of everything we've done. So I'm very excited. We've already written over half of the whole arc, and it's the biggest, craziest arc of Justice League yet, but also I think the most emotionally touching and harrowing of all of the arcs that we've built so far.
And if you don't mind me just narrowing the scope a little bit for a second, you brought back a fairly obscure version of Starman, which is a character that is synonymous with legacy in the DC universe, and you've really made his very origin story kind of tied to the foundations of the story that you're telling in the DC universe as a whole. But have you given any more thought to, because it's pretty obvious this character is going to play a major role, I guess, but have you given any thought to how any of the other Starmen throughout DC history might figure into the future of this as well?
Absolutely, yes. And like I said, Justice Doom War deals with hypertime, and there is already a second Starman on one of the covers, I think, of the story. So yes, there will be more than one Starman in the last arc, and all of it matters.
So let's just talk specifically then about the ending of Justice League 28, because of all the crazy stuff that Lex has done. He kind of powers up at the end of the issue and does something particularly heartbreaking given the context of the character and the history he has with Martian Manhunter now. Can you kind of explain what happens on those last couple pages?
Absolutely, yeah. So something that we've been hinting at going all the way back to the first arc of Justice League is the idea that the people on Earth who have been studying the totality and the whole mystery of Perpetua in the universe were aware that there was this species that existed in the previous version of the universe, in Perpetua's dark version of our I shouldn't say dark multiverse because that's a different, but Perpetua's multiverse, the original intent. And there was this kind of perfect apex predator being that was built out of the DNA of both Martian kind and humanity, and that and there were scientists sort of running through human history in the working under Vandal Savage and then and Lionel Luthor and now ultimately Lex Luthor, trying to discern, like, okay, how can we build this apex predator today, to build this kind of immortal vessel for all of the powers of Perpetua. And what we see at the end of 28 is Lex Luthor becomes the apex predator. He becomes this perfect killing machine that, you know, he essentially kills the Martian Manhunter and brings his essence into himself and transforms finally into this, you know, ascended being. And now he is ready for the final battle. And we've been calling him Apex Lex in all of our documents, and I think it even made it into some of the solicits because it just sounds good. But Apex Lex is born, and now the Justice League is in real trouble, and so is the whole universe.
Great. Well, we'll see how this figures into Justice Do More, and whatever crisis you guys are cooking up. Thanks so much, James.
Thank you, and keep reading.